Right, okay, so hello. Just to introduce myself, my name is Paul Catherall and I work in the library, and I work as an e-learning librarian supporting our online students mainly and remote students. And I'll be talking about providing library support and teaching for online students in the context of internet control. So the issues I'd like to talk about today, I'll briefly introduce the context of the online students at University of Liverpool, and talk a little bit about the Library for Online Programmes, which is a sort of subset of library pages to provide support infrastructure for those students, challenges that those students face more generally, and then the positive impact of networked learning, especially for developing regions of the world. And then I'll define internet control, which is the main topic of this presentation. Talk a little bit about the architecture of the internet, just to remind ourselves about how that works and how that's important, and also developments impacting that open internet, and then a little bit about key concepts and behaviours that we observe around this topic of internet control, the main regions that are impacted, circumvention issues, the mechanisms, the approaches that students adopt to work around some of the issues I'll be talking about, and then we'll conclude. In terms of our online students at University of Liverpool, we've had a partnership with the company Laureate for many years, since 1998. It's going to conclude very shortly, by 2021, and we will be engaging with a new partner, Catherall, from 2020. And the partnership has been involved with over 80 countries, mainly focused around master's programmes, but also CPD programs. At its peak, I believe it saw over 20,000 students. And we do have a sizable historical engagement from Africa, West Africa, the Middle East, East Africa, and the majority of the programs are management focused, but the other subject areas include computing, health, psychology, education, and law. I think I've missed law out. Obviously, the programs serve a variety of time zones around the world. Obviously the infrastructure needs to be available to support this remote context for these students, so they obviously have a lot of resourcing needs. The model for pedagogic delivery is asynchronous historically, and it's focused mainly around discussion boards. Most of the faculty, as they're termed, are based in diverse locations across the world, so they engage on the same kind of level as the students through a VLE. And as I mentioned, the Catherall partner will be working with us from 2020. And of course, there are many other issues, such as authentication from not the library's perspective, in terms of providing access to subscribed library databases. The Library for Online Programmes is, as I mentioned, it's a kind of a subset of resources, web pages for the online students, focused around digital content. We do provide support for some campus issues and campus services, but the majority of services that we're providing are digital focused. So this website and its resources are focused on that digital experience. The services are focused around, obviously there's a basic need to access the resources, to authenticate, support around resource type-based resources, subject-based resources. It has an interdisciplinary approach. I also provide a lot of self-led materials for the students, so they're able to engage in a just-in-time format if they want to undertake a tutorial, or they want to view a presentation or a video. We also support 24/7 services, of course, and IT services. And just to mention, there are many non-partnership-based programs, such as the Online Veterinary Science program, which has around 2,000 students. That's a quick snapshot of the website that I provide for the students. As you can see, it has some integration into our authentication system, such as the login tool in the left-hand menu. So it tries to provide a more digitally focused and slightly more integrated approach into our systems. And so some of the general challenges for the students: password issues, registration issues, security issues, in terms of using our authentication platforms, the communications aspect, of course, because they are based remotely, so often there's a lag in terms of communications. You may be receiving an email that's 10 hours behind in time, in terms of their time zone. They have a lot of self-directed literature needs, so they'll often do their literature review and then they'll require access to materials for their specialist topic for their dissertation, for example, perhaps which we don't license through the University of Liverpool. There can be issues around non-licensed resources, embargoed content, where there's been a time expiry issue on the resource, content that's never been digitised or published in a digital format. DRM issues, where there are restrictions coded into the resource, technical issues, and so on. There can also be latency and bandwidth issues, where in some regions of the world, latency is a particular problem, where it's just extremely slow in terms of accessing our resources, in terms of the network. And then also some physical resource issues, so difficulties in accessing print copies, for example, in some regions. And then, of course, general support requirements for databases, e-resources. So, so obviously there's been an enormous uptake of networked connectivity across globally, and in particularly in developing regions of the world. So Ong and Kang have pointed out that there's huge potential for these regions to engage in a globalized provision of learning and teaching. Push has commented on the massive uptake of social networks in many world regions, and also on the uptake of smart devices, mobile devices. So to get on to the main topic of the presentation, internet control was a topic that I researched to some extent for my PhD a few years ago. And we can say that internet control can be defined as measures imposed on internet-based systems relating to restriction of access, sometimes for an entire population, but potentially for specific groups, the filtering of content or terms by keyword or phrase, including surveillance, and potential mass restriction or mass closure of networks. I've defined this previously as potential use of wide-scale proxies in terms of the way that these technologies are implemented. And Subramain has commented on the approaches taken within some regions in terms of internet control as a means of regulating and controlling network access, potentially under the guise of protection for citizens. So obviously there's a variety of technologies that we may be familiar with in terms of internet architecture globally. Obviously the web browser and the World Wide Web are a key technology which have become prevalent now in terms of access to the internet. There are also major infrastructure in terms of the way localities are connected, the T1, T2, the backbone infrastructure that connects major world regions, the big cables that run under the oceans and so on. Open standards such as TCP/IP, HTML5, and so on, which are the standards that are set out by major bodies such as the World Wide Web Consortium, RIPE, and so on, who regulate and provide guidance for the technologies that the internet uses, and provide open internet guidance, which has influenced the EU open internet regulations. So some recent impacts on the open internet include filtering in regions such as China and in Thailand, issues surrounding the Arab Spring since 2011, which resulted in mass closure events, also known as kill switch events, where entire regions were disabled in terms of internet access. There's a debate in the West, in regions such as Canada, the US, on net neutrality, where there is a debate in terms of imposing fees on core infrastructure. And there have been other recent developments around the world, particularly in the Middle East. And from 2017, we did here at Liverpool experience significant problems in those regions, particularly the UAE. We can see some research that's been carried out in recent years. Rensis, for example, has identified regions that are at risk of internet disconnection. And we can see patterns in terms of the southeast part of the globe, southern hemisphere, Middle East in particular, and that's repeated in a Freedom House survey, and also in terms of a survey of social media that was carried out, again the same kind of regions, and a World Wide Web Consortia survey of open internet characteristics and issues. So some of the key concepts and behaviours that we note, including here at Liverpool, includes issues around authentication, so students being unable to access key technologies such as SSL, which is a key security technology, which is now mainstream on all web pages. Filtering DNS blocking, so for example, blocking access to particular domains, kill switch events, which I've already mentioned, circumvention issues where our users do attempt to overcome issues using various technologies, packet and keyword filtering, where the data is being analysed and obstructed. And these kind of behaviours can be observed on a national level. So the UAE, for example, has a national framework using software that's developed in the US. Other symptoms that students experience include simply having a white screen, unresponsive pages, unresponsive resources, databases, student portal, VLE, etc. And issues around all kinds of encryption and secure data that they need to access. So just moving on quickly as we're running a little bit out of time. So this is the sort of thing that a student might see, for example, in the UAE when they try to access a resource which is encountering these kind of issues. We have a lot of examples from students who use our platforms. You can probably see this later on in your own time and read these. But as recently as yesterday, I spent sort of 2 hours with a student trying to troubleshoot issues where they were based in a hotel room in Dubai. The issues can be quite significant. So that particular student hadn't contacted us in recent times, but was about to write their dissertation and found that they just weren't able to access network resources normally. That issue was resolved, thankfully. Impacted regions, I've mentioned some already: North and East African countries, the Middle East, South and East Asia. The Russian Federation, I'm not quite sure what's happening over in Russia, but we do have a lot of students have problems in Russia. It could be a latency issue, I don't know. And then some surrounding regions can have issues where they're nearby countries that have issues, potentially because of that major infrastructure I mentioned. And it can be difficult diagnosing whether or not the issue is really related to connectivity or whether it's latency or other technical problem or just very poor network infrastructure. And circumvention can involve use of VPNs, privacy browsers, compression tools, and these kind of approaches, proxies. And it is also possible to simulate this behaviour over in the UK. So to conclude, it's a growing trend which has exacerbated since the 2010s in the regions I've mentioned. It's a major consideration for the delivery of global education, which will be pertinent in terms of our new Kaplan partnership, where the focus will be on Southeast Asia and an international market. Students' fears and anxieties need to be considered. There needs to be good liaison and cooperation between professional service departments and also academic teams. And there's a need for consideration around communications and the way this is explained and support, in terms of the way students are supported. Appropriate language and sensitivity needs to be employed. So that can be reflected in service level agreements and other documentation. There's a need for a risk management approach, and this is a poorly understood phenomenon. And during my PhD, I did find that this is poorly documented in the peer review literature, and I believe it is a poorly understood phenomenon that needs to be explored further. So I'll leave you there with a few. It's not moving forward. Yeah, there is a bibliography, but it seems to be hard to get to. Anyway, I'll let you perhaps have a look at the presentation in your own time when it's shared later. But there is a bibliography at the end that provides you with some resources. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Paul.